we'll go from there. Naseem and Rina. I've been thinking about Richard Hilton's critique of Naseem Khan's The Art Britain Ignores, 1976, and what that tells me about whiteness. When I mentioned that report to Sarita, she asked me to consider why people had listened to that report at that time, and I'd just been reading Naseem's memoir, and I said something like, because she was white passing and Oxbridge educated, and that's not me. And I hadn't considered the layers of what that might mean and how conflicted that might be.
I didn't know about the report until I found Khan's obituary from a random Google search, which led me to her memoir, and I noticed her biography straight away.
Naseem was the daughter of Abdul Wasi Khan, a doctor from India, and Gerda Nee Kilbinger, the daughter of a German trade unionist who had come to Britain to learn English. Abdul was resolute in his admiration of Britain and determined that his daughter would become part of the British establishment, sending her to Radian School near Brighton and being delighted when she won a place at Lady Margaret Hall, Oxford, to study English.
I was so struck by this combination of biographies, mine and Lena's in one person, and the date of her death, as I was birthing and nursing Lena. Her children were nursing her through her final days. And when I read the memoir, I really thought through her divergent worlds, the ones of community activism, her travels to India and Pakistan, and I thought of my own travels and how they had not felt as easy as she seemed to find them. And the complicated relationship to whiteness her father presented her as he paid deference to white institutions and felt such pride in her, but enacted heartbreaking neglect towards his other dark-skinned daughter from his first marriage in India. And I think about the stories in her memoir where she is living in Ladbroke Grove and being an activist running the newspaper Hustler. And there is a moment when internal rifts mean that she is labelled bourgeois, because she is half white, and only her name is proof that it is only half. And she says, I am weary of all the suspicions and paranoia and the anti-whiteness, and I'm tired of living in a half-world of angry shadows.
And I think about my parents and how they named me Gemma, and what that did in the other direction. Like what my friend Elham said about how her name was difficult, so people ignored her. I wonder, did I get through a bit more because I was legible? Did Naseem find it easier in India at the Arts Council at Oxford because of her skin? Was she treated with suspicion in her activist spaces because of it? And I think about her father, who wanted so badly for her to fit in with all the spaces she ended up navigating, and the details in the book where she hints at her divergences with her husband, who was white. And I wonder at that nexus and how you navigate whiteness from there. When you birth children into the world who seem whiter than you, and does that make you conciliatory, hopeful? Does it make you politely argue in non-confrontational terms, as Hilton says she does? Does it make you smooth out the edges to make it more comfortable in some spaces and less in others?
Even when she writes,
I can't get invisibility out of my mind. A sudden sense overwhelms me. We don't exist. There are no Indians anywhere, just here on these hidden Sundays when the teacher sweeps the big rubber across the blackboard at school. Everything vanishes. There is just the blackboard, just like that, as if we, and no more than we, were never there.
Was that her getting got by her own whiteness, by playing into their missionary language of benevolence and conquest?
Does she neutralise her own anger and hurt in her efforts to be heard?
And I think about other women from all backgrounds who've told me they see the same thing as me, decry institutional racism, but when I reach out for help, they smooth out the edges, implicitly tell me to be quiet. Were they just trying to get by?
And I think about my own internal critique of Rina Bhavnani's paper when I first read it, thinking it was too conciliatory, not enough, written by another South Asian collaborator, as I burned through the anger and frustrations of my own conversations with whiteness. Then I read this report just published today where they talk about the diverse workforce and their disproportionately bad mental health, and it doesn't mention discrimination or racism or homophobia. And I go back to Rina's report and I see all the times she said those words, told them. I reflect again on the length and care of that report, the patient tone of it, And I Google her and I find another obituary, another battle with cancer, one from a year after that report was published, and see that she was an activist, a founder of Bristol Black Sisters. I wonder what contortion she had to go through to move from speaking freely with her sisters to finding the right language to write about institutional racism for the institution.
I wonder what choices and changes she made, which injustices she named, and which were left unsaid, the ones she deleted, the ones that were too much.
The obituary makes me want to ask her so many questions. She was so much like me. Indian, went to grammar school, went to Bristol University, and she had 2 children, mixed just like Lena.
I wish I could ask Nasim and Rina how they felt and what they felt and how they thought and how they wrote and moved with all those stories.
But I can't because they were gone before I knew any of it.
In class last week, Aditi pointed out Audre Lorde died of cancer. And I thought how both Nasim and Rina died of cancer too. And that's the day I sent the last email to BFI and resigned from British Council. Because at times this year, when speaking back to whiteness, I have felt this pain in my bones and body. If you refuse to be a collaborator, refuse to be complicit in their contortions, and choose instead to tell the truth, but in the wrong places, where it is not received, but can only be funneled back into you, where else can it settle but in your bones, your body, the soft tissues of your hope?
Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you. Wow. That's a lot, eh? That's a lot. Like thinking with and sitting with and holding those histories, right? And seeing the kind of the connections between those histories and your life and Lena, your daughter's life as well. And yeah, I think all of these these narratives and conversations, they make me think about, what Saidiya Hartmore calls temporal entanglement, the inextricable connection between past, present and future, and how in these narratives around race, migration, histories of silence, histories of embodied sadness, how temporality just collapses, everything kind of bleeds into each other in a nebulous but really beautiful way. And yeah, I think the beauty in that is that we can touch all of these different histories and that they live with us and they help us to kind of disentangle the messiness and the knots that we hold. Yeah. And I think you expressed that really, really beautifully. Yeah.
And I think in that piece, it's really interesting because, so I released the research a week ago or just over a week ago. And, alongside I've been learning with you again, right? And so that reference to you in that piece was added just a week ago. And, I don't know, I think there's something in there, where I think that piece is finished and I'm done with it and I'm ready to let go of the whole research and stuff. But it was interesting that there were things to be learned. There were small things to be learned in that moment that came from that learning space. And it's interesting because we never talked about that piece before. Actually, you hadn't read it till yesterday. And we started talking about some of the nuances of that piece before you'd even read that piece, right? And we were talking about, intimate relationships, sisterly relationships, and how we forge creating new worlds, through them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And in a way, in order to do that, I had to grapple with some negative relationships, right? Or negative associations in order to find some really positive ones. And also actually, even though there's this history of conflicted relationships with South Asian women, in my learning of the history of diversity, through doing this research, I have these really beautiful friendships with South Asian women, like Rohana, who you mentioned, like you, like so many others, like Zarina and Jasleen, and so many beautiful people who have taught me so much and are helping me to